Native American English learners, like many English learners across the United States, need support with English language acquisition. Research shows that focusing on native language acquisition can help improve students' English language acquisition. Leaders of tribal nations consider strong cultural identity to be key to sustaining their communities and the success of their students. These students can be described as walking in both worlds, being a part of Native community with a strong cultural identity steeped in their heritage, while also working to achieve success in the U.S. education system. REL Southwest has been working in partnership with local administrators, educators, and researchers in New Mexico, along with the New Mexico Public Education Department since 2012, to support English learner students, including Native American English learners.
My name is Tiffany Lee. I am Dene, which is Navajo on my mother's side, and Lakota on my dad's side. I am the chair and professor at Native American Studies at the University of New Mexico. So my research area of personal and professional interest is Indigenous language revitalization.
My name is Christine Sims. I'm from Acoma Pueblo. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Language, Literacy, and Social Cultural Studies at the University of New Mexico in the College of Education. I also direct the American Indian Language Policy Research and Teacher Training Center.
In New Mexico, there are 23 tribes, pueblos, and nations, 32 districts or charter schools identified as Native serving institutions, and 33,000 American Indian students.
So the languages that we have here are Keres, which has 7 different dialects. Then there's Zuni, which is only spoken in Zuni Pueblo. Toa, which is only spoken in Jemez Pueblo. And then we have 4 dialects of Tiwa, and then we have 6 dialects of Tewa. So those are the Pueblo languages. The Athabascan languages are represented by the Jicarilla and Mescalero Apache nations, and also, of course, the Navajo or the Dine people. Our languages here in New Mexico are very much threatened by the fact that we see an accelerated pace of what we call language shift happening, meaning that more and more child generations are speaking English than they are our native languages.
You're in a situation where this is the only place where this language is existing. They can't travel to another part of the country or another continent to get immersed in the language.
Most all of the Pueblo languages that are spoken among the 19 Pueblos are only spoken here in New Mexico. So there is a very, very real threat in terms of language loss among these languages if nothing is done to maintain them.
Having schools and communities provide support for Native language acquisition can help Native American students acquire English skills and help sustain the cultural heritage of tribal nations. These students can be key to preserving their indigenous languages, which are not as widely spoken as the native languages of many other EL subgroups.
Educators in general need to be aware of this situation, of the critical nature of native language maintenance, because without that understanding of how critical it is to the cultural survival of native communities where these languages are spoken, you can't fully appreciate then some of the current efforts that are going on to bring these languages into school settings.
English language development has been a part of schooling for Native American students since Western schooling has been imposed upon them in the late 1800s. And what we find then was children came to school speaking their native language. Today, you have the situation where there's been a tremendous language shift across Native communities across the country, and most Native children across the country come to school primarily speaking English.
So when they come to school, of course, the challenge is learning the academic English of schooling. And if children haven't had that opportunity to help unpack what that language looks like for academic purposes, then they're going to continue to struggle.
They're speaking English. Maybe it's not a standard academic English. Maybe it's a community English. It's an English that's influenced by their native language and families and heritage.
So what we know from children learning their heritage language is the benefits of not only the cognitive benefits, but the metalinguistic learnings that they acquire.
We're finding that what they were learning through their native language, learning if it's a written language, learning to read and write the language, learning to speak the language and use the language, really enhances their ability then to transfer those kind of cognitive skills to learning English.
And so those benefits of language learning are really something that transfers, if you will, in terms of their ability to not only communicate in a different language, but also to think in different ways. And they really are benefiting from those cognitive pathways that are being built. So the challenge of making these opportunities available for children to learn a native language in a school setting has very much to do with how a district goes about working with first the tribal communities, their leadership, and also figuring out ways in which families can be a part of that.
It's really about educators understanding the cultural context of the community where they're teaching and reaching out to communities so that there are more equitable partnerships between communities and schools.
Professional development is another piece. How do we inform educators, especially those who are non-native, about best practices and things that we know from good bilingual research, but also things that we know about our own communities here in New Mexico.
Atrocities committed during the Franco-Indian War, 1754 to 1763, that had concluded just later.
The assumption is that one has to merely translate bilingual materials that come from Spanish into a native language and somehow we've solved the problem, right? And we know that's not the solution.
Okay, do we know what atrocities is?
As the New Mexico Public Education Department strives to meet accountability benchmarks for English learner students, they also work to meet the needs of the communities they serve. This includes supporting indigenous languages.
My name is Lori Smith, but my maiden name is Lori Small-Waisted Bear, and I am an enrolled member of the Sichang Oyate in Rosebud, South Dakota.
In 2016, the New Mexico Public Education Department convened a group of 7 educators to create the American Indian English Learners Task Force and develop support for Native American students.
Initially, we were told we were to develop a curriculum that was centered in English language development for American Indians. And that stirred a lot of conversation because we have a history of 500 years of a system trying to completely eradicate our identity. And to do that in 6 sessions, 6 days, was unrealistic. And we said what we can do is we can create a framework.
The American Indian English Learners Task Force created a framework to develop culturally and linguistically responsive instruction for American Indian English learners in New Mexico.
Our central focus was that teachers often don't know their native students. That's the epicenter, is know your student. But central to that is definitely the preservation of heritage languages. Another issue that's central to that is creating a learning environment that reflects the unique cultural and linguistic identity of your students.
There's a definite need for the state to see language immersion and indigenous language development as a way to support students' overall academic success. In Navajo language, there's a term, which means kinship and family and relationships, but it's so much more than that. It's how you engage with your community, how you sacrifice for your community, how you support your community. So schooling can be more than just learning academic subjects that are compartmentalized. It's really about what is your place in the world and how can you contribute and how can you support not only your community, but the rest of the world as well.
So if we can provide the kind of support that's needed for children to learn these languages, that in the long run hopefully is going to contribute to cultural sustainability, because if you could envision a basket, for example, it's that thread that weaves throughout that basket that holds everything together. And so when that language begins to erode and wear away, then that basket of cultural knowledge begins to fall apart.
What are some promising research-based strategies educators and administrators can use to support Native American students with language acquisition? REL Southwest works in partnership with educators and policymakers to develop and use research that improves academic outcomes for students. To learn more about our Southwest English Learners Research Partnership in New Mexico and other REL programs, visit our website, subscribe to our Twitter feed, and sign up to receive our newsletters and other publications.